A Cars off-road race-style attraction in Frontierland at Magic Kingdom actually makes perfect sense, and I'm going to tell you why. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel where today I'm talking about something that people have been absolutely buzzing about, though it's probably a little bit more appropriate to say that they've been ranting and raving, and that is changes coming to Disney's Magic Kingdom here at the Walt Disney World Resort. Now look, at this point I'm sure that most of you are probably already aware that Disney's fan event, D23, recently took place, and during that event, Disney made a number of announcements, including some changes coming to the Walt Disney World Resort. And today I want to focus in on some of those changes, more specifically changes coming to Magic Kingdom in Frontierland. So here's how it went down. During this year's D23 fan event, Disney made a number of announcements, and one of those announcements is that here at Magic Kingdom we were going to be getting a Cars themed attraction, or I should say that we are going to be getting a Cars themed attraction. But it wouldn't be until after the event was already over and everyone made their way home that Disney would talk about where this attraction was going to go. I think a number of people thought that it would happen behind Big Thunder Mountain because Disney had talked about doing like a Beyond Big Thunder Mountain expansion in the past, but as it turns out, that isn't going to be the case. And it's this right here that has a lot of people really upset. Rather than putting this Cars attraction behind Big Thunder Mountain or clearing out some other space to put this attraction in, they're actually going to be putting it where the Rivers of America and Tom Sawyer Island currently is. And as soon as this piece of information made its way out, people started losing their minds. Some people have already made up their mind and said that this is absolutely going to ruin Magic Kingdom. Others have repeated the fan favorite that Walt is rolling in his grave. And you know, of course, right? We get a very similar response every single time any type of change is announced at Walt Disney World, which makes sense because, of course, people have a very strong emotional connection to Walt Disney World, especially when we talk about attractions that maybe they grew up with. But there's also some value in overinflated opinions. This is, of course, the internet, and people like to hear when people are absolutely outraged or when people have rose-colored glasses on and can't see anything but the positive. It's just more fun to watch someone who's on either side of the spectrum, and less so if you're being reasonable. Despite that, here we are. Now look, before we get any deeper into this discussion, I think it's important to say that when it comes to D23, I try not to get too heavily invested. And that's honestly just because I take D23 for what it is. It's a hype event. The goal for these types of events is to get people psyched about what can and might be, and not what is. And look, the same can be said for other similar events through other industries as well. This isn't just a Disney thing. We actually see this a lot in the automotive industry. There's always new concepts coming out. Sometimes it's like a sure thing that we're going to get a certain make, model, or feature. But, and let me tell you, there's always a but. If it does happen, which it doesn't always, it's not always as advertised. So yeah, things like D23 can be fun to get sucked into, but I try not to invest too heavily in them, especially for what we're doing here. You know, my goal here is to essentially help you travel better, get you the information you want and need to know so that you can plan your vacations and do your vacations with more success than you might be having or you may have had in the past. Focusing too much on concepts and maybes just isn't going to help you save money. It's not going to help you save time. It's not going to help you do much of anything. But I do get asked about these things every once in a while, and I did get asked about my thoughts when it came to this topic, so I wanted to sit down and chat with you about that. And yeah, it's fun to speculate. It's fun to share some thoughts on things like this. But on top of just kind of sharing my thoughts and answering your questions, I also want to help people simmer down a little bit, because people have gotten a little bit over the top when it comes to the frustration with this announcement, and I think it can impact the way that you enjoy the parks. And that just seems ridiculous because we don't even know what's going on yet. Not for sure. We won't for some time. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So first things first, I'm a believer that change can be a good thing, and it often is, even when it might be off to a rocky start. I'm also a firm believer that you don't get progress without change, and especially when we talk about things like Disney, I find it a little silly when people are so resistant to change, especially people who are so heavily invested in Disney. You know, they often reference Walt and may even treat Disney like a religion because it seems to ignore the theme that Walt himself leaned into throughout his entire career. You know, progress, innovation, progress through innovation. That all having been said, the idea of removing two, let's be honest with ourselves here, wildly unpopular attractions in order to make way for something new seems to be an obvious choice. I mean, even taking the whole, like, this is Disney, progress, change, it'll always be in a state of becoming thing out of the mix, it just seems like an obvious choice for any business to eliminate something that isn't popular in order to put in something that might be overall making a better product. But, you know, Disney is selling nostalgia, and so doing that type of thing does rub people the wrong way. Of course, we always have to keep in mind that Disney is a business. But, you know, going back to these two attractions, both Tom Sawyer Island as well as the riverboat on the rivers of America, I also think that it's a good choice to move on from these attractions because they don't really help the park in any way, and they don't really manage capacity or, as a result, crowds. I mean, both of these attractions are only open for a very limited time throughout the day. They're not really a big draw for anyone, and so I do think that that ultimately results in longer lines elsewhere, which is something that a lot of people complain about as well. But the loss of these two attractions aside, another major criticism that I'm hearing a lot of people bring up when it comes to adding cars to Frontierland is that it just doesn't fit. But I actually think that it does. Now, Frontierland at Walt Disney World was meant to represent a few different areas to include the Colorado Rockies, the American Southwest, and even Arizona's Monument Valley. Later in '92, they would include the Deep South, which didn't really make sense. That was Splash Mountain, by the way, for those of you who might be wondering. The story most definitely didn't fit, though the attraction itself visually fit. But look, that's a whole can of worms that we're not going to get into today. Also, there was a time period associated with this, mostly the 1800s, though each different area represented a different time period. For example, Thunder Mountain's like 1880. And that, I'm sure, has a lot of you wondering, well, hold on a second, how does Cars fit into this? There are actually two ways, at least in my opinion, that Cars fits in here rather nicely. The first is kind of on the nose. As I mentioned, Big Thunder, representation of Monument Valley. We also have a similar location in the Cars films. I believe it's Ornament Valley. Even as we take a look at the concept art, which of course might not turn out like that, right? This is concept art, things change, but it's certainly not a stretch from what we see in Frontierland to begin with, not even as far of a stretch as Tiana's Bayou Adventure was. But even beyond the visuals, you know, the aesthetics of having this type of attraction in Frontierland based on the concept art and based what is currently in Frontierland, there's a pretty solid historical connection as well. And that connection is dirt track and cross-country racing. In fact, it's in the very area represented in Frontierland that one of the earliest cross-country races took place in 1916. That race started in Los Angeles and ended at the Arizona State Fair in Phoenix. Now, for those of you who are wondering, that race was just over 100 years ago. I know we don't often think of auto racing happening that long ago, but it's true. And believe it or not, that's the same amount of time between now and when that first race happened as there would have been in 1971 between then and the time that they were trying to depict in Frontierland. It was just over 100 years. Honestly, I think that's pretty cool. Now, of course, today the area represented in Frontierland is still very well known for not only off-road racing with races like the Mint 400, but also just for off-roading in general. For example, Moab, Utah is very well known for off-roading. And I'll tell you what, if you take some time to look up Moab, Utah, first of all, you definitely should because it's absolutely gorgeous, but you'll see the connection between that and what we see in Frontierland. And the same can be said if you look into races like the Mint 400. It actually looks very similar to what we very well might be getting with this Cars attraction. Now, of course, this is an attraction, it's not an actual off-road race, but the connection is there, and I think it's a pretty easy connection to see. Now, with all that having been said, what are my final thoughts here? I think everyone needs to take a collective breath. You know, I know that there are a lot of people talking very passionately about this, but one thing that I don't think enough people are taking into consideration is we don't know how this is going to turn out. It might turn out great, it might turn out terrible, but we really won't know until it's done. And while we can spend all of our time and energy speculating on how it will actually go and like ranting and raving about how terrible it's going to be, I just don't see the sense in that. It doesn't really make sense to focus all of my energy there, especially because we just don't know what's going to happen until it's done. So for me, I'm just going to sit here and wait. And yeah, I'll update you when I see changes, and I'll tell you about the things that I think you need to know, mainly the things that are going to impact your vacation. But aside from going, yeah, I think that this could fit, and it's going to be a little sad to see some of these attractions that people love go, I also can't ignore the reality that These aren't popular attractions that really don't get love regularly, and regardless how they make people feel, the reality is sometimes it's got to be out with the old so we can be in with the new. Yes, even with all the space that we have here at Walt Disney World. That's another part of the discussion that people always bring up. We have so much space, just expand out, expand out. I don't think those people have ever driven around out here. But with that, I think it's time to wrap up today's discussion. Of course, I want to hear what you have to say, not only about this, but other D23 announcements. How do you feel about any of them? How do you feel about this? Are you excited? Are you not excited? Do you not really care? Are you like me and you're just waiting for it to be done before you really formulate an opinion? I'd love to hear it, so drop it in a comment down below. We'll also spend some time talking about some of the other D23 announcements. I do want to wander around and share some of my thoughts on those as well. But again, like I said, I'm not heavily invested in this. We'll see how it goes once it's done. But yeah, this has been quite the discussion. I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me. Kind of enjoyed the weather. It was raining there for a little bit. Now it's kind of humid, so perfect time for me to head inside. I hope you have a fantastic day wherever it is you are, and I hope you'll join me next time. Until then, bye guys.